August 15th, 1945. Imperial Palace, Tokyo. Emperor Hirohito's voice crackles across radio waves at exactly 12 Sky's noon, announcing Japan's surrender to the Allied forces. In homes across the archipelago, 73 million families huddle around receivers, faces pale with absolute terror. The surrender broadcast echoes through paper-thin walls, carrying words that spell doom for every man, woman, and child. They've been told for months, day after day. What comes next when the American devils arrive? Mass executions, systematic rape, children enslaved, women forced into dishonor worse than death itself. The propaganda ministry painted occupiers as demons worse than any nightmare their ancestors ever conjured. They expected devils. They found saviors. Stay to hear the exact order that rewrote everything they thought they knew about defeat, occupation, and the true nature of their supposed enemies. Yokohama Harbor, August 30th, 1945. Dawn breaks gray and ominous over Tokyo Bay. The USS Missouri sits heavy in morning mist, her massive guns pointing toward a nation that tried to sink her sisters for 4 brutal years. Transport ships stretch to the horizon like a steel armada, packed with 300,000 American troops, more soldiers than Japan has bullets left to fire. On shore, Japanese civilians peer from behind shuttered windows, wooden boards, and bombed-out buildings. Empty streets echo with the hollow sound of boots on concrete, broken glass, and rubble from B-29 raids. The first wave of occupation has begun, and nobody knows if they'll survive to see sunset. The temperature hovers at 78 degrees Fahrenheit to 26 degrees Celsius. Humid air, thick with smoke from still-burning districts. Grid reference 139.69 by 17 degree, 35.44472 degree north. Coordinates that will redefine military history. American landing craft hit the beaches at 0800 hours sharp, exactly as planned, exactly on schedule. But something's wrong. No gunfire, no resistance, no desperate banzai charges, just silence and the sound of steel hitting sand. Major General Robert Eichelberger steps onto Japanese soil at precisely 0800 hours, his boots crunching on volcanic sand mixed with shell fragments. His leather briefcase contains 17 pages of directives from Supreme Commander Douglas MacArthur. Orders that contradict everything these men learned about warfare in 4 years of Pacific hell. Directive number 1, written in MacArthur's own hand: treat Japanese civilians with dignity and respect, feed the hungry, protect the innocent, heal the wounded. This is not vengeance, this is reconstruction. His aide, Captain Morrison, reads the order twice, his hands shaking. After 4 years of brutal Pacific War, after watching friends die at Pearl Harbor, after Bataan Death March survivors told their stories, after kamikaze attacks that killed thousands of their brothers, they're ordered to show mercy to the people who started it all. "Sir," Morrison whispers, staring at the directive, "are you sure this is right? These people wanted to kill every American they could find." Eichelberger looks toward the silent city, sees curtains twitch in distant windows, imagines the terror behind each hidden face. "Captain, we're about to find out if mercy is stronger than revenge." Private Tommy Nakamura, a Japanese-American soldier from Hawaii's 492nd Regimental Combat Team, carries a K-ration pack through Yokohama's bombed-out streets. The irony cuts deep into his soul. His own parents and younger sister were locked behind barbed wire in Manzanar internment camp, while he fought Nazis in Italy, earning a Purple Heart and Bronze Star for a country that didn't trust his blood. Now he's back in the land of his grandparents' birth, offering food to people who share his face, his ancestry, everything except his uniform and his allegiance. The city reeks of destruction. Charred wood, concrete dust, human waste from broken sewers, and underneath it all, the sweet, sick smell of bodies still buried in collapsed buildings. A small girl, maybe 7 years old, watches him from a damaged doorway, her brown eyes huge in a face aged by months of starvation. Her cotton dress, once probably white, hangs loose on a frame hollowed by hunger, arms like sticks, cheekbones sharp enough to cut paper. Rice rations dropped to 300 calories per day in the final months of war, barely enough to keep a child's heart beating. The K-ration package in his hands contains 2,700 calories of real food: beef, crackers, chocolate, cigarettes, even toilet paper. More nutrition than this family has seen in 2 months. He kneels down on broken concrete, extends the olive green package toward her with both hands, Japanese style, showing respect. "Tabemono," he says softly. Food. The girl's mother appears like a vengeful shadow, grabbing her daughter's arm with desperate clawing strength, yanking the child back into the darkness of their ruined doorway. She bows frantically, apologizing in rapid, terrified Japanese, her voice breaking with each word. "Sumimasen, sumimasen, sumimasen." Sorry, sorry, sorry. This is it. This is the moment her child dies. This is where the American demon shoots them both for daring to exist, for being Japanese, for surviving when so many others didn't. Nakamura speaks her language perfectly, words flowing like his grandmother's lullabies. "Daijubu desu, kore watabe mono desu, anata no musume no tameni." It's okay, this is food, for your daughter. The woman's entire body freezes like she's been struck by lightning. She expected broken English barked through clenched teeth, harsh commands screamed over rifle barrels, maybe a gun butt to her skull before the final darkness. Instead, she hears perfect Japanese from an American uniform. Words spoken with the gentle inflection her own father might have used. Pronunciation pure as temple bells. Her death grip on her daughter's arm slowly, impossibly, begins to loosen. Coming up, the chocolate bar that changed everything, and the Japanese mother whose reaction spread like wildfire across an entire nation, rewriting decades of hatred in a single bite. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Willoughby reviews classified intelligence reports in his makeshift headquarters, a commandeered sake brewery that still smells of rice wine and fermentation. The reports paint a picture of expected carnage that never materialized. Soviet intercepts, decoded by his intelligence team working around the clock, suggest Stalin anticipated massive Japanese resistance. Urban warfare lasting at least 6 months, civilian uprising on the scale of Warsaw or Stalingrad, American casualties reaching 50,000 in the first month alone. Chinese communist propaganda mills churned out leaflets about inevitable American atrocities, preparing their own population for stories of mass murder and systematic brutalization. Even British intelligence, usually conservative in estimates, predicted guerrilla warfare lasting through 1946, with organized resistance cells operating from mountain caves and bombed-out urban areas. The reality developing before Willoughby's eyes looks completely different, almost impossible to believe. Japanese police report for duty each morning, bowing to American MPs. Local officials present themselves for assignment, offering cooperation instead of sabotage. Citizens emerge from hiding not with weapons, but with white flags, curiosity replacing hostility in their eyes. "Sir," his aide reports, holding a fresh batch of intercepted radio communications, "Soviet command is asking their agents why there's no resistance. They can't understand why Japanese civilians aren't fighting back." Near Atsugi Airfield, 14:32 hours. Staff Sergeant Mike O'Brien from Pittsburgh sits cross-legged on rubble across from the most impossible sight of his military career. A former Imperial Navy petty officer, weathered face bearing scars from naval battles in the Solomon Islands, the same man whose destroyer task force helped sink USS Hornet 2 years ago. They should be trying to kill each other with knives, bare hands, anything available. Instead, they're sharing a meal like old friends, like humans who understand that hunger transcends nationality. Neither speaks the other's language, but starvation needs no translator, requires no common vocabulary. O'Brien opens his C-ration can of beef stew with his P-38 can opener, the small metal tool every GI carries, officially called John Wayne for its versatility. Real meat chunks float in thick, rich gravy that steams in the cool afternoon air, releasing an aroma that makes the Japanese family's eyes water with desperate longing. He divides the precious contents into 4 equal portions, using his dented aluminum mess kit, mathematical precision born of battlefield experience, sharing food with wounded comrades. The Japanese family, father, mother, and 2 young children, eat with tiny, reverent bites, tears streaming down weathered faces that haven't seen this much protein in 8 months. They chew slowly, savoring every grain of meat, every drop of gravy, making the miracle last as long as possible. The youngest child, a boy maybe 4 years old, makes small sounds of pleasure that cut through O'Brien's heart like shrapnel. But first, you need to understand exactly why this moment was supposed to be completely, utterly impossible, according to every military manual ever written. American military logistics in 1945 represented the most sophisticated supply chain in human history, an industrial miracle that defied comprehension. Liberty ships, mass-produced vessels churning out of American shipyards like automobiles, delivered 40,000 tons of supplies daily across 6,000 miles of Pacific Ocean, 40,000 tons every single day, 7 days a week. To put this staggering number into perspective, that makes the math visceral, that represents more food in 24 hours than most Japanese cities saw in entire months of wartime rationing. The logistics network stretched like steel arteries across the Pacific, refrigerated trucks maintaining cold chains for fresh vegetables, meat, and dairy products across distances longer than most Japanese citizens had traveled in their entire lives. Each individual K-ration package contained more protein than Japanese families saw in 7 days. Real beef, genuine pork, chicken that hadn't been stretched with sawdust or tree bark, actual chocolate made with real cocoa and sugar, cigarettes, chewing gum, even luxuries like toilet paper and waterproof matches. American quartermasters, working in supply depots from Saipan to Okinawa, couldn't believe the mathematical impossibility they were witnessing daily. They were feeding their former enemies, people who had tried to kill them for 4 years, better than those enemies had ever fed themselves, even in peacetime. When GIs shared these packages with Japanese families, they weren't just offering food. They were demonstrating the staggering productive power of a nation that could treat military combat rations as casual charity, evidence of an industrial capacity so vast it seemed almost supernatural. What happened next shocked even Stalin's most experienced spies, men who had witnessed the siege of Stalingrad and the fall of Berlin. Intelligence intercepts from Soviet sources, decoded by American cryptographers working in underground bunkers, reveal Moscow's complete bewilderment at Japanese civilian compliance. Stalin's advisors, veterans of Eastern Front brutality, had predicted massive resistance movements, organized guerrilla campaigns, urban warfare cells, civilian uprisings that would make the Warsaw Ghetto look like a minor disturbance. KGB operatives stationed in neutral territories to monitor the occupation report, finding none of these expected conditions. Instead, their coded transmissions document scenes that contradict everything they learned about occupation warfare. American soldiers playing baseball with Japanese children in bombed-out lots, teaching basic English phrases in improvised schoolrooms, helping rebuild damaged bridges with volunteer Japanese labor, sharing cigarettes with former enemy soldiers who just weeks ago were preparing suicide attacks. 1447 hours, the moment that changes everything. The sergeant's chocolate D-bar sits unopened on the wooden ammunition crate, serving as their impromptu dining table, dark wrapper slightly melted from the afternoon heat. This is the moment history pivots. This single candy bar, mass-produced in a Hershey factory in Pennsylvania, is about to rewrite everything 73 million Japanese civilians believe about their conquerors, their fate, and their future. O'Brien breaks the dark brown square into precise pieces, with fingers still stained with gun oil and dirt, extends them toward the children with the reverence of a communion ceremony. The youngest boy, perhaps 5 years old, stares at this strange brown block with the fascination of discovering alien technology. He has never seen chocolate in his life. Cocoa was impossible to import during wartime. Sugar was rationed to near invisibility, and luxury sweets vanished from Japanese civilian life years ago. His tiny fingers shake as he accepts the piece. Uncertainty and hunger warring in his dark eyes. He places the chocolate on his tongue, bites down carefully. Sweetness explodes across his palate, a flavor so rich, so impossibly complex and delicious, that his entire face transforms like sunrise breaking over mountains. Pure joy spreads from his eyes to his lips. The first genuine smile this child has managed in months of air raids, starvation and terror. For 30 seconds, war doesn't exist. For 30 seconds, he's just a little boy discovering the most wonderful taste in the world. His mother watches this miracle unfold, her hands pressed to her mouth to contain the sobs. This American devil, this supposed monster from across the sea, just gave her starving son something more precious than gold, more valuable than family heirlooms, more meaningful than life itself. Not punishment, not retribution, not the death she prepared for, pure, inexplicable joy. The tears come in torrents now, unstoppable rivers of relief, gratitude and confusion that threaten to drown her standing up. That evening, as sunset paints Tokyo Bay orange and red, she tells her neighbor Tanaka-san about the chocolate, about the soldier with kind eyes who spoke no Japanese but communicated in a universal language of generosity. Tanaka-san tells her sister. The sister tells her mother-in-law. Within 3 days, the story spreads through Yokohama like flames through dry paper, then jumps to Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya. American soldiers share their precious food with Japanese families. They help clear rubble from collapsed homes. They treat children with impossible kindness. The propaganda machine that painted them as demons told lies. Every single word was false. They expected devils. They found saviors. By September 15, 1945, General MacArthur sends a classified cable to the War Department in Washington that nobody in the Pentagon expected to read. Japanese civilian cooperation exceeds all projections by orders of magnitude. Civil administration functions normally. Food distribution proceeds without incident or resistance. Recommend continuing current humanitarian protocols. But the numbers buried in intelligence reports tell the truly impossible story. His staff processes 15,000 individual requests daily from Japanese civilians desperate to work with occupation forces in any capacity available. Officers couldn't believe the numbers when they first appeared in morning briefings. 15,000 human beings every single day, 7 days a week. Former enemies literally forming lines that stretch for city blocks, waiting patiently to help their supposed conquerors rebuild the nation those same conquerors just finished destroying. American officers stare at the endless queues in complete disbelief, trying to reconcile this reality with everything they learned about occupation warfare in military academies. "This makes absolutely no sense, sir," Major Patterson reports to his commanding officer, holding registration forms that pile higher each day. "According to every manual ever written, they should be fighting us with kitchen knives and homemade bombs, not asking for jobs. They should be sabotaging our supply lines, not protecting them. They came as conquerors expecting resistance." They're becoming something unprecedented in military history, liberators welcomed by the very people they defeated. The expected guerrilla warfare never materializes. Instead, something never before documented in the annals of warfare unfolds daily. Voluntary collaboration on a massive, impossible scale. Then winter arrived like a death sentence, and everything almost fell apart. The transformation accelerates through autumn months as temperatures begin dropping toward what meteorologists predict will be the coldest winter in decades. In Nagoya, Master Sergeant Frank DiMaggio, whose grandfather immigrated from Sicily seeking opportunity in America's industrial heartland, now organizes food distribution for 2,000 Japanese families daily. The irony isn't lost on him. His own family fled poverty and found prosperity, and now he's helping Japanese families find hope in their own country's ruins. Lines form before dawn outside his supply depot, a converted warehouse that still bears scorch marks from incendiary bombing runs. Elderly men, who once prepared to die for the emperor in final banzai charges, now queue patiently for flour, canned milk, and preserved vegetables. They bow deeply to DiMaggio as they leave, carrying burlap sacks and wooden boxes that will keep their families alive for another week, another month. Long enough maybe to see spring return to their devastated homeland. November 1945. Grid reference. 139.767 35.618.260 Gwen. Winter approaches like an execution order from nature herself. Coal shortages threaten to freeze entire Japanese cities into monuments of ice and death. Without heating fuel, without adequate shelter, the fragile trust built over 3 months of careful cooperation could shatter in a single week of sub-freezing temperatures. Desperate people commit desperate acts. History teaches this lesson in blood across every civilization that ever faced starvation and cold simultaneously. American engineers race against dropping thermometer readings, working 18-hour shifts alongside Japanese technicians to restore power plants, heating systems, and coal distribution networks that sustained 20 million people before the bombing campaigns reduced them to twisted metal and broken dreams. Captain Robert Hayes, a mining engineer from Pennsylvania coal country, who understands winter's killing power, coordinates fuel distribution across northern Honshu, where temperatures are predicted to plunge below 10 degrees F to 12 degrees C. December 15, 1945. Temperature 15 degrees, 9 degrees C and falling. Hayes's crews work 16-hour shifts in conditions that freeze exposed skin in minutes, their breath forming ice crystals that cling to wool scarves and leather gloves. But the real shock that stops every soldier in his tracks comes when word spreads through the ranks about what's happening in the enlisted men's barracks. American soldiers are giving away their own regulation winter blankets to Japanese orphanages, GIs sleeping on bare mattresses in unheated buildings so Japanese children can stay warm through nights that kill the weak and elderly. They came as conquerors with orders to occupy a defeated nation. Now they're freezing to save the families of men who tried to kill them with kamikaze planes and banzai charges. They expected devils. They found saviors. How do you hate people who sacrifice their own warmth so your children don't freeze to death in the darkness? A Japanese foreman named Yamada, working on Hayes's heating restoration team, lost his eldest son, Kenji, in the desperate fighting on Iwo Jima. 20-year-old boy bayoneted to death in a tunnel while trying to hold ground against Marines who just wanted to go home to their own families. Yamada tells Captain Hayes this story through their interpreter, Sergeant Fujita, expecting immediate dismissal or transfer to less critical work. Enemy fathers don't usually discuss their dead sons with the men who killed them. Instead, Hayes assigns him to supervise the emergency heating project for 3 local orphanages housing 847 children whose parents died in bombing raids or from starvation and disease. Your boy died serving his country the way he understood honor, Hayes tells him through the interpreter, words chosen carefully to respect grief that transcends nationality. Help me make sure other children don't freeze. Help me make sure no more sons die from something we can prevent. Yamada works through Christmas Day, 1945, New Year's Day, 1946, and every day between, ensuring every child in his district has adequate heat, blankets, and warm food. He sleeps 4 hours per night, rises before dawn, drives himself to exhaustion making sure American promises aren't empty words. On January 15th, he reports to Hayes that not a single child under his protection has died from cold-related causes. "Sir," he says in broken English he's been learning from American technical manuals, "your soldiers give blankets. My country's children live. This is This is miracle. What happened next would shock even MacArthur himself, a man who witnessed the Japanese surrender ceremony and thought he understood the scope of what victory meant. By spring 1946, cherry blossoms blooming pink and white across a landscape still scarred by bombing craters, the relationship between occupiers and occupied has fundamentally transformed beyond all recognition, beyond anything in military history textbooks. American officers don't just eat in Japanese restaurants. They're invited to family celebrations, wedding ceremonies, funeral rites, treated as honored guests rather than conquering foreigners. GIs don't just marry Japanese women. Their commanding officers attend the wedding ceremonies, pose for photographs, send congratulations telegrams to families back in America. Children who once prepared to die with sharpened bamboo spears rather than face foreign soldiers now sprint toward American jeeps and trucks, shouting hello and thank you and chocolate please in broken English. Arms outstretched for hugs from men whose uniforms once represented death itself. They swarm around GIs like puppies, desperate for attention, affection, and the occasional piece of candy that tastes like heaven dissolved on their tongues. But the most statistically impossible, historically unprecedented number is yet to come, buried in classified reports that won't be declassified for 30 years. By 1947, over 50,000 Japanese men volunteer to serve alongside American forces in support roles, construction projects and administrative positions. 50,000 former kamikaze pilots who plan to die crashing into American ships now teaching English to American airmen stationed at Atsugi and Yokota. Ex-Imperial Navy officers who commanded destroyers in battles against the U.S. Pacific Fleet, now helping plan harbor reconstruction projects. Soldiers who once worshipped Emperor Hirohito as a living god, now saluting the American flag each morning, pledging allegiance to democratic principles their grandfathers would have considered foreign poison. Intelligence officers stare at recruitment reports in stunned silence, trying to process numbers that contradict everything they learned about human nature, national loyalty, and the psychology of defeated populations. "Sir," one analyst writes in a classified memo to MacArthur's headquarters, "we're not occupying Japan anymore. Japan is joining us. They're becoming something new, neither American nor traditionally Japanese, but something unprecedented. And the transformation extends beyond individual relationships into institutional change that reshapes an entire civilization." General Eichelberger writes to his wife Margaret in May 1946, "These people were told we were monsters who would rape their daughters and enslave their sons. Instead, we showed them mercy they never expected from enemies. Now they're teaching our boys how to use chopsticks properly, how to fold origami cranes, how to appreciate poetry that finds beauty in temporary things. War is hell, darling, but peace can be more beautiful than we ever imagined possible." By summer 1946, the final intelligence reports from MacArthur's headquarters document something unprecedented in the recorded annals of warfare, occupation, and human conflict. 0 major uprisings, 0 organized guerrilla campaigns, 0 civilian resistance movements of any significant scale. For the first time in documented military history stretching back to ancient Rome, a major occupation of a defeated enemy nation succeeded not through systematic brutality, mass executions, or terrorizing the population into submission, but through acts of unexpected generosity that transformed hatred into gratitude. Japanese industrial production climbs 12% monthly as factories transition from military equipment to civilian goods. Pots, pans, bicycles, radios, everything a peaceful society needs to rebuild itself from ashes. Democratic reforms proceed ahead of every timeline MacArthur's staff projected, with Japanese officials eagerly implementing voting systems, women's rights legislation, and constitutional changes that seemed impossible during the militaristic 1930s. Most remarkably, most impossibly, American casualty rates among occupation forces remain lower than peacetime training accidents at military bases back in the United States. An entire nation of 73 million potential enemies became willing partners in their own reconstruction, transformation, and rebirth. Dr. Takeshi Yamamoto, a pediatrician in Osaka who treated malnutrition cases throughout the war, documents the miraculous nutritional recovery of Japanese children in his medical journal. Before surrender, his clinic handled 60-80 cases of severe malnutrition daily, skeletal children weighing 60% of normal body mass, mothers who traded precious family heirlooms for single cups of rice, families eating grass soup and tree bark to survive another day. By October 1945, American field kitchens serve hot meals in school courtyards across the city. Children's weights begin climbing toward healthy ranges for the first time since 1943. January 15, 1946, he writes, in careful Japanese characters, examined 127 children today. Average weight gain, 8.3 pounds since October. Growth rates approaching normal ranges. The Americans feed our children better than our own government fed them even before the war began. I have witnessed a medical miracle that has nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with human kindness. But the nutritional transformation extends beyond mere calories into psychological healing that touches entire families. Children who cowered at loud noises from PTSD caused by B-29 raids now laugh and play games with American soldiers. Mothers who hoarded every grain of rice like diamonds now cook elaborate meals to share with their new friends. Fathers who expected execution or imprisonment now work alongside former enemies to rebuild schools, hospitals, and homes. Spring 1947 brings cherry blossom season and statistics that government analysts in Washington initially refused to believe. Crime rates in occupied Japan dropped to levels lower than most American cities. Black market activity, expected to flourish during occupation chaos, virtually disappears as legal supply chains distribute American goods efficiently across the population. Venereal disease rates among occupation forces remain at historic lows, evidence that relationships between American soldiers and Japanese women are based on genuine affection rather than exploitation. But the most profound transformation occurs in places where former enemies work side by side on reconstruction projects that benefit everyone. At Yokohama Harbor, American engineers and Japanese dock workers labor together to rebuild port facilities destroyed by naval bombardment. Language barriers dissolve into pointing, sketching, and the universal communication of shared purpose. Master Sergeant Tony Ricci from Brooklyn finds himself teaching crane operation techniques to Hiroshi Tanaka, whose brother died on a kamikaze mission against the USS Enterprise. First week, we just stared at each other, Ricci writes to his wife. Him knowing I probably helped sink ships with his friends on them. Me knowing he probably built some of the planes that tried to kill my buddies. Now we eat lunch together every day. He's teaching me Japanese numbers. I'm teaching him how to calculate load weights in American measurements. Yesterday he showed me pictures of his daughter's first steps. Tomorrow I'm going to show him pictures of our Tommy's baseball team. The harbor project becomes a symbol of impossible cooperation. Japanese workers arrive early, stay late, suggest improvements that American engineers haven't considered. American supervisors share technical expertise, safety protocols, and advanced construction techniques that will serve Japan for decades. By autumn 1947, Yokohama's port facilities exceed their pre-war capacity, handling cargo ships from around the world carrying goods for Japan's emerging peacetime economy. Temperature readings for winter 1946-47 show the coldest season in 20 years, with some areas of northern Japan hitting 15 degrees Celsius to 26 degrees Celsius for weeks at a time. Coal supplies remain critically short, but now Japanese and American crews work together with desperate efficiency to ensure adequate heating for hospitals, schools, and orphanages. The cooperation that began with shared blankets evolves into sophisticated resource management that saves thousands of lives. Captain Hayes, now promoted to major, coordinates fuel distribution across 3 prefectures with Japanese officials who understand local conditions better than any American ever could. Yamada-san knows every village, every family with elderly members, every building that won't survive another week without heat, he reports. His knowledge combined with our supply capabilities means nobody freezes. Nobody dies from something we can prevent. The fuel crisis that could have destroyed Japanese-American cooperation instead strengthens it beyond anything peacetime treaties might accomplish. Shared hardship creates bonds that transcend nationality, ideology, and recent history. When spring returns in 1947, American and Japanese workers celebrate together, not as occupiers and occupied, but as human beings who survived winter through mutual dependence and trust. Intelligence reports from this period document a phenomenon military analysts struggle to categorize or explain. American soldiers begin requesting extended tours of duty in Japan rather than rotation back to the United States. Japanese families apply to host American servicemen in their homes, offering free meals, accommodation, and cultural exchange that enriches both sides. The occupation that began with fear and suspicion transforms into something unprecedented, voluntary integration of former enemies into sustained friendship. By 1948, 3 years after surrender, MacArthur's headquarters processes requests from American families wanting to immigrate to Japan permanently. Engineers, teachers, doctors, and skilled workers see opportunities to build new lives in a country that welcomes their expertise and treats them as honored guests rather than foreign occupiers. Simultaneously, Japanese citizens apply for immigration to the United States in numbers that strain processing capabilities, not as refugees fleeing defeat, but as people seeking opportunity in a nation they now consider an extended family. The final statistical impossibility appears in classified reports dated December 1949. American-Japanese marriages number over 10,000, with divorce rates lower than comparable marriages between American citizens. Children born to these international families grow up bilingual, bicultural, and completely comfortable bridging 2 societies that spent 4 years trying to destroy each other. They represent a new generation that proves lasting peace grows from personal relationships rather than political treaties. The economic miracle that follows surpasses every projection. Japanese manufacturing, rebuilt with American technical assistance and Japanese craftsmanship, begins producing goods that compete successfully in international markets. The Made in Japan label, once associated with cheap wartime substitutes, becomes synonymous with quality, precision, and innovation. American consumers eagerly purchase Japanese products, while Japanese consumers adopt American styles, foods, and cultural preferences with enthusiasm rather than resentment. The transformation that began with shared K-rations in the ruins of Yokohama evolved into the most successful military occupation in human history. Instead of the predicted brutal subjugation that characterized every previous conquest of a major power, Japan experienced reconstruction that preserved dignity while implementing change. Instead of revenge for Pearl Harbor, Bataan, and 4 years of Pacific warfare, American policy chose reconciliation that transformed enemies into allies. The propaganda ministry's warnings about American devils proved catastrophically wrong in every particular. The real devils, historians would later conclude, were the militaristic leaders who starved their own people while preparing for a war they couldn't win, who taught children to hate enemies they'd never met, who chose national suicide rather than accept defeat with honor. 73 million Japanese civilians discovered that their former enemies could become their closest friends, their trusted partners, their bridge to a better future than anyone imagined possible during the dark years of war. Children who expected death received chocolate, education, and opportunity instead. Mothers who prepared for dishonor found dignity, respect, and hope for their families' futures. Fathers who awaited enslavement discovered partnership in rebuilding a nation stronger than before defeat. They expected devils. They found saviors. The shuttered windows that once hid terrified faces now opened wide onto gardens where Japanese children and American soldiers played baseball together, where former enemies shared meals and stories, where two cultures discovered they had more in common than anyone believed possible. The occupation that began with fear ended with friendship, proving that even the darkest propaganda, the deepest hatred, and the most bitter warfare cannot withstand the transformative power of simple human kindness offered consistently, generously, and without conditions. The lesson written in the ashes of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, taught in the ruins of Tokyo and Yokohama, demonstrated in 1,000 small acts of mercy between former enemies, remains one of history's most hopeful chapters, that human beings possess an infinite capacity for forgiveness when given reason to hope rather than cause to fear.